Real frames per second data across 6 titles shows the 7600X3D delivers 92% of 7800X3D gaming performance at 71% of the cost. See which games close the gap and when to upgrade. Competitive shooters and esports titles showed the smallest gaps. In CS2, the 7600X3D averaged 487 frames per second versus 512 frames per second on the 7800X3D, a 5% difference that vanishes above 360 Hz refresh rates. Valorant showed similar results, 612 frames per second versus 641 frames per second, well past diminishing returns for any monitor. Apex Legends at 1080p competitive settings gave us 231 frames per second on the 6-core chip versus 248 frames per second on the 8-core and 7% delta. Open-world games with heavier CPU loads widened the gap slightly. Cyberpunk 2077 with RT Overdrive off ran at 142 frames per second on the 7600X3D versus 158 frames per second on the 7800X3D, an 11% advantage for the pricier chip. Starfield showed the biggest. Starfield's Creation Engine 2 scales heavily with core count in cities like New Atlantis and Neon. The 7800X3D's 2 extra cores prevent the frame time spikes that cause stutter on the 7600X3D when NPC density peaks. If you spend 40-plus hours in Bethesda RPGs, that 14 frames per second difference translates to noticeably smoother panning in dense areas. Cyberpunk 2077's crowds and traffic simulation also see measurable gains from 8 cores. Walk through Kabuki Market at noon in-game and the 7800X3D holds 158 frames per second average where the 7600X3D dips to 142 frames per second with occasional drops to 128 frames per second. That's the difference between locked smoothness and perceptible hitching on a 144 Hz panel. Future titles. If your library is 70% competitive shooters and MOBAs, the 7600X3D delivers near identical results for $100 less. CS2, Valorant, League of Legends, and Apex Legends all run past 240 frames per second minimums on both chips. That $100 savings buys you 16 gigabytes of faster DDR 6000 CL30 instead of 6000 CL36, which nets you more frames than the CPU upgrade would. Budget builders targeting $1,200 to $1,400 total system cost should prioritize GPU spend. A build with a 7600X3D and RTX 4070 Super outperforms a 7800X3D with a base 4070 in 11 of 12 titles we tested. The extra QDA cores and memory bandwidth matter more than 2 CPU cores when you're GPU bound at 1440p. The 7800X3D's 2 extra cores shine outside of gaming. Blender renders finish 33% faster, Premiere Pro timeline scrubbing is noticeably smoother, and compiling code or running local LLMs sees 25 to 30% gains. If you use your PC for work and the gaming performance is close enough, the 8-core part justifies itself through productivity alone. Streaming while gaming also favors the 7800X3D. OBS X264 Medium preset encoding at 1080p60 uses about 15-18% CPU on the 8-core chip versus 22 to 25% on the 6-core. That headroom prevents frame drops during intense firefights in Warzone or Apex. If you stream or record gameplay regularly, the extra cores prevent the stutters that ruin clips. Background tasks. Both CPUs use AM5 and drop into the same B650 or X670 boards, so platform cost is identical. AMD committed to supporting AM5 through 2027, meaning you can upgrade to Zen 5 X3D chips in 2026 or Zen 6 in 26 without a motherboard swap. The socket longevity makes either chip a safe buy compared to Intel's annual socket changes. DDR5 pricing has dropped enough that 32 gigabytes of 6000 CL30 kits cost $95 to $110, removing the platform tax that made early AM5 adoption painful. Pair either CPU with DDR5 6000 and you're at the sweet spot for Infinity Fabric Sync. Faster kits like 6400 or 6800 show negligible gains in games. So, for builders on fixed budgets, the 7600X3D makes more sense 70% of the time. The $100 savings funds better RAM, a larger SSD, or the step from an RTX 4070 to a 4070 Super, all of which deliver more tangible frames per second gains than 2 extra CPU cores. If your library is competitive shooters, esports titles, and older AAA games, the performance gap is 5% or less. The 7800 X3DD justifies the premium if you play heavy simulation games, plan to stream, need productivity performance, or want maximum frame time stability in new releases. The extra threads prevent the worst-case stutters that the 7600 X3D can't fully avoid in demanding scenarios. It's also the build your free playbook for any GPU at betterfps.com/optimize.